Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, as-salatu was-salamu ala Rasulullah. There's been a lot of discourse regarding the human nature and whether the nature or essence of human being is good or bad. Did the horrible events, wars, violence, tragedies, and destructions over the history of mankind occur due to his bad nature? What about many good events, good accomplishments, exemplifying the humanity and virtues? How do we reconcile the two? A vast number of people, especially among the non-religious, believe man is basically good and that he can save himself on his own. I'm not sure why they think he needs saving if he's basically good. A question can be asked, why do people do good things? Nobody ever asks that question. Why is that? The reason nobody asks that question is that our society believes that man is basically good. Hence, he's expected to do good. Then they are surprised or disappointed when someone does bad things. Hence, immediately ask, why did he do that? Naturalism says man is the product of his environment. As the product of evolution, man is just a more highly evolved animal. He's the product of his environment. This was the underlying assumption of behavioral psychologists like Pavlov, Maslow, and Skinner. When it comes to the nature of man, they were the most consistent naturalists. As Skinner said that the mind was a myth and that thoughts were simply chemical reactions in the brain responding to physical stimuli. Man simply responds to his environment. As such, man does not have free will. Therefore, if you find yourself committing a crime, it's not your fault. It's because of the way you were raised or because of your parents or present circumstances. Therefore, you shouldn't be punished. Does this sound familiar? One of the big problems with this view is that if man is basically good, how did we get a bad society or bad environment to start with? It would seem the first society would have been made by good people, hence perfect from the start, and would have stayed perfect. There's obviously a logical problem with this, but that doesn't deter these advocates. And then there are those who say religions, especially Islam, advocate that human nature is bad and should be disciplined or coerced so he does not do the wrong things or simply beat the goodness into them. Is this true? What does the Quran say about the nature of mankind? That is the topic of our lecture today. According to the Quran, the nature of man is not a constant and has the potential to swing both ways. Islam focuses not so much on the nature of man, but rather human potential that can cause one to do good or bad, what we call nafs. So the focus is more on the end result. That said, regarding man's nafs or consciousness, the Quran says in chapter 91, فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Then Allah inspired it with conscious of, with discernment of what is wrong for it and what is right for it. Means mankind was given the conscious and the intellect to distinguish between right and wrong, its wickedness and its righteousness. However, we do have verses that talk about man's nature and his general tendencies as well, like إِنَّهُ كَانَ ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا. Indeed, he is unjust and ignorant. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لِرَبِّهِ لَكَنُودٌ. Truly man is ungrateful to his Lord. كَلَّا إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى. Despite this, man tends to be rebellious. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. Surely man is at loss. وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ قَتُورًا. Mankind is ever stingy. وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ أَكْثَرَ شَيْئًا جَدَلًا. But man is in most things contentious. But the Quran also talks about how God has honored man and bestowed special favors upon him. As we read in chapter 17, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ وَحَمَلْنَاهُمْ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ وَرَزَقْنَاهُم مِّنَ الطَّيِّبَاتِ وَفَضَّلْنَاهُمْ عَلَى كَثِيرٍ مِّمَّنْ خَلَقْنَا تَفْضِيلًا. We have honored the children of Adam and carried them on land and sea. We have provided them with good things and greatly preferred them above much of our creation. But while God gave mankind these special physical favors, as well as the intellect and free will, he gave mankind the potential to be one of the most honorable creatures with highest status, or the worst of all, with lowest status, as indicated in chapter 95 toward the end of Quran, says, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. Surely we created man of the best stature. Here the Quran talks about best of potential man possesses, which starts with anyone with good character all the way up to the prophets, who were the best human beings, who have the highest stature. Then the next verse says, ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. Then we reduced him to the lowest of the low. Here, the Quran talks about the other extreme, where mankind has the potential to be the lowest of the creatures through his evil deeds. The only creature with the potential to kill his own kind while he has a choice not to. No animal has this feature. Hence, the mankind has potential to be worse than animals. You won't find an elephant killing other elephants or destroying the environment. But mankind can kill thousands of his own kind at the push of a button. The Quran mentions man's specific potentials in other verses, but here talks about the true extent of two extremes. Ability of mankind, the abilities that mankind can possess in his character. Then comes the exception from the above, lowest of the low group. In the next verse says, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونٍ. Except for those who believe and do righteous deeds, for they will have uninterrupted reward. Which means, by believing in his Lord and Creator and understanding his purpose in this life and putting his belief into practice and doing righteous deeds, mankind can join the first group with highest stature and honor. Another example in chapter 103 says, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Swearing by the time of the afternoon, mankind is at loss, except those who believe and do righteous deeds and exhort one another to truth and exhort one another to patience. Hereby, we see the Quran separating a group from the general human population, and these are the believers, whom God will honor with best of stature and reward them. From this, we can conclude that, generally speaking, while acknowledging man's potential to do evil deeds, Islam and the Quran exclude the believers with righteous deeds. And that is what is missing by those who do not know Islam. Islam says man left alone to his vices can go astray and have all the traits we mentioned in the earlier verses and potentially become lowest of the low. However, Islam, through its teachings, gives training, education, tarbiyah to mankind to be the best he or she can be. Hence, separates them from those who do not believe. That is why you see in many verses of the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jal makes an exception by saying, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, except those who believe and do righteous deeds. Even in chapter 99, where it says, when the earth is shaken with her final earthquake, referring to the last day, in verse 3 it says, وَقَالَ الْإِنسَانُ مَا لَهَا, and the man asks, what is the matter with it, with earth? Some commentators have said by insan, mankind, the verse is referring to non-believers because Muslims already know about this day, believe in it, and have a very good understanding of what it will be like and what will happen on earth, an earthquake unlike others, etc., through details given by the Quran. Another example, in chapter 80, Allah curses man's nature. قُتِلَ الْإِنسَانُ مَا أَكْفَرَ. Perish the human, how unthankful he is. Does this include all the honorable human beings and the prophets? Of course not. Here, insan means mankind. Generally speaking, a non-believer who does not have the training, because a believer who does good deeds is also thankful to God. So the verses mentioned earlier where the Quran says mankind is unjust, ungrateful, rebellious, stingy, contentious, etc., it is referring to an untrained man, those who have not had tarbiyah, who are among the non-believers. So the nature of mankind has been given the consciousness, nafs, with inspiration to do good or bad. And many great physical bounties, including his intellect and all kinds of potentials, plus Allah Azza wa Jal completed his favor on mankind by sending messengers with instructions on what is the criterion, mizan, the standard on how to live a happy, peaceful, content, and righteous life. But if man is not given this training and left on his own, well, he has desires. He will swerve toward his own whims and desires, toward greed, jealousy, transgression, moral decay, hence commit injustice, all of which are destructive to him as well as his society. His unchecked desires can even make his intellect justify his actions, and that is exactly what we're facing today with all man-made disasters and tragedies around the world. So the question becomes, did the creator of human race, who gave mankind these desires, not give him instructions on how to control and use these desires properly and without harm? Of course he did. And that is where his messengers and his instruction book come in. That is why his laws and divine fate resonate with man's nature. One might also ask, what about people who are not believers, not Muslims, or not even religious, yet they do righteous deeds? and in general, they are good or nice people. The answer to this question goes back to the difference between the moral characteristic of a Muslim or a believer versus moral characteristic of a secular person or a non-believer. A non-believer holds himself to man-made moral standards, which, by the way, vary depending on the geography, many of which are subjective as well. A secular person in Western world might have a different moral and ethical code than a person in the Eastern world. Even within the Western world, there are different standards. So, which one is right? Which one are we supposed to adhere to? When you say he or she is a good or a nice person, according to whom? You and I? According to Aristotle? According to Immanuel Kant? According to whom? Who sets the criterion? The secular morality, akhlaq, looks at immediate benefit, then makes a quick harm and benefit analysis of what appears on the surface and follows it. They say we live in a society which is based on give and take, based on immediate harm and benefit. Hence, we need to adjust our ethics and moral values accordingly. Furthermore, these secular moral codes and laws are based on social relations and connections, whereas religious, especially Islamic moral code, akhlaq, is based on not just the short-term and long-term benefits in this life, but also deeper implications and the benefits in hereafter. With divine moral code, often there may not even be an apparent or immediate benefit, rather even sometimes sacrifice than benefit. In any case, a believer adheres consistently to the same moral code, and he values it openly or in secret when no one is around. There may even be a cost to him if he tells the truth, for example, meaning telling the truth may be to his own or loved one's disadvantage, yet he will tell the truth. In Islam, akhlaq, moral code, is an honorable matter and cannot be measured with material or monetary values because these are superficial indicators and standards. People who subscribe to secular moral philosophy can sometimes lie and may sometimes tell the truth according to where their benefit and material interest is. One may commit an indecent act in order to benefit from something in personal or societal level in one place and different in another. If he's asked why he did it, and he will say, in this case it was to my benefit, in other case it was not. As a result, there's really no standard, no yardstick to measure against. Akhlaq is no longer an absolute or a constant, rather something relative, something subjective. Whereas the divine ethical and moral code controls one's whims and desires, even in secret, even when one might be able to get away with it. An honor system to its fullest when practiced. It is this code that can educate, train mankind who possesses both outward appearance, zahir, and inward, batin potentials. Otherwise, man-made laws are routinely proposed and approved based on social relations, then abrogated, changed, or replaced with one another all the time. This is why, in reality, a person who is not religious might know moral and ethical values. He might even teach them, yet at the same time be an immoral person without certain ethics. This is where religion comes in. So when we say he or she is a good person, it depends on how we define good and according to whom. Besides, how do you know this is a good person? Have you been with him or her 24/7 to know what they really do? Do you really know what they would do if there came a time when their interest was at risk and no one is watching how they would react, what they would do, or whether they would lie if it comes down to it? What would stop them anyway? In the Quran, akhlaq is based on sacrifice and benevolence, meaning Islamic akhlaq, divine morals, considers humanity and spirituality above and beyond the material interests. So a believer with Islamic akhlaq and behavior considers many things, weighs many things in the scale before he or she does something. Many things to him may be immoral, yet moral to an unbeliever or a secular person. A secular physicist who has deep knowledge about atomic material, its science, its math, its property, and its potential, knows a lot more about the subject than an average person, yet still proceeds to build an atomic bomb, as we have witnessed in history. Were these people insane? No. They were some of the smartest mathematicians and scientists ever known. And they knew exactly what they were doing and its ramifications, yet they did it. We discussed Islamic moral system in a lecture called Moral Teachings in the Quran. Please refer to that lecture for more details. Back to the human nature, this is why a training, tarbiyah, is essential for mankind so he can reach his humanity and his kamal, perfection, completion. This is why when addressing or discussing mankind's nature or tendencies in a negative sense, the Quran often makes the exception by separating the believers, mu'mineen, after mentioning the term insan, mankind. The Creator who knows our nature gave us the divine code on how to reach the potentials within our nature, how to reach kamal and the higher stature in creation. A prime example is the early Islamic era, where we find the pre-Islam pagan Arabs, influenced by ignorance and superstitions, used to bury their young girls alive, treat women as possessions, and trade them, commit all sorts of indecencies, drink wine as if it was water, gamble constantly, fighting and killing each other over trivial things. Within few years, Islam transformed the very same people, their hearts and minds, through the training and education, tarbiyah, provided by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and teachings of the Quran. So much so that they became trainers and educators themselves to the rest of the world as they propagated Islam to the neighboring civilizations. As the Quran reminds us in chapter 8, and brought together their hearts. If you had spent all that is on earth, you could not have brought their hearts together. But Allah brought them together. They became brothers in faith, willing to sacrifice for each other. They were still part of human race before and after Islam. However, a world of difference in their humanity, behavior, and character before and after Islam. This is why it is so important for us Muslims to deeply care what happens to the next generations of mankind and Muslims. We must strive by educating ourselves first about the real Islam and make sure the same training, tarbiyah, is passed on to our children and their children, while making sure it is done on time, not when they're all grown up, as many parents complain about their children not listening to them because it is too late. With that, we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make us among الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, those who truly believe and do righteous deeds. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.